have with us live from actually my hometown, again, Boston, the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, Representative Barney Frank. Chairman Frank, we can't thank you enough for being here. We're really looking forward to hearing from you as financial professionals and your insights on the current economic state. And I'll let you take it away. Thank you very much, sir.
Well, you're welcome. I do have to have one minor correction. Politicians indulgence. I'm actually in the city of Newton, not Boston, which is in my district, so, but it's right next to Boston, so that was very close. And I'm very glad to be addressing this very important group. John Weinfurt, with whom I work close in Washington, was one of the ones who asked me if I could do this. And it is important. It's important because we have a kind of double job before us right now. First of all, we've got to cope with the current crisis. And actually, the current crisis is a twofold crisis. People were concerned, obviously, when Congress finally passed the legislation that had been requested by President Bush, although in form that I think was much better, but it was the thrust of what he asked for. The reaction in the financial markets was not nearly as good as many people had hoped. Part of the problem there is that on the very day that the House did pass the bill, we received terrible news in the rest of the economy, i.e. the non-credit parts of the economy. We got the job report for September, which showed 159,000 jobs lost, bringing it up to 760,000 for the year, well on the way to losing over 1 million jobs this year. So that we would be having trouble with the markets, even if it weren't for the credit crisis. Put the two together, it was a serious problem. So we've got a twofold approach. One, what do we do to deal with the current crisis? How do we forestall a recurrence? The current situation includes trying to get as much liquidity as possible into our financial institutions, and I'm going to say that I believe that what Secretary Paulson announced last week with regard to capitalizing banks was a good proposal. It is an authority, that is, to buy equity in healthy financial institutions so they can in turn lend. It was an authority that we explicitly gave him in the bill. I was disappointed in the reaction, frankly, of Mr. Thain from Bank of America that said, well, we're going to take this money, but we're not necessarily going to lend it for a quarter or so. That's really a fundamental misunderstanding of what motivated Congress to pass that bill, and I hope that that's being reconsidered. We're talking about taxpayers' money here. We hope ultimately to be able to recover it by asset sales, by other protections, but to accept, even if it's just a loan, and sit on it and not make it available, that's a grave error. I hope that'll be corrected. Beyond that, though, we are talking about responding to the broader economy. One of the things that's helped us in the area of the employment, while we've lost a lot of jobs in the private sector, state and local governments responding to the needs they've confronted have actually added some employment. But that's about to reverse because of the budget problems they're now encountering as a result of the economic problems. The state and local governments that have been hiring people are about to start laying people off. So when Congress comes back into session after this election, in a lame duck session, we are going to be passing a package of measures, I believe, that should include some tax reduction for middle income and working class people who will go out and spend it. We're into a classic period where we need some fiscal stimulation. And secondly, we're going to be providing some help to states and cities. There are construction projects doing important things in the environmental field, the transportation field, that are about to be shut down. We've got to avoid that. We need the economic work that's going on there. The second question, though, if we are able to cope with the infusion of liquidity and with some effort to respond to job loss, is how do we prevent this from happening again? And over a longer perspective, excuse me, it's campaign season, politicians get all hoarse. We over the longer term probably have the most important job, which is to keep this from happening again. And to do that, you've got to analyze why we're in this situation. Not to point blame, but because if you don't look at what had happened, you don't know how to go forward. I think there are two things that we are dealing with here. One, the proliferation of subprime mortgage loans that shouldn't have been made. And it's interesting, important point here. Those were largely made by the unregulated financial institutions. If banks and credit unions regulated by their state and federal regulators were the only ones making mortgage loans, as they used to be, we wouldn't have had a subprime crisis. We have one because innovation came in, and we have have a lot of new entities that had access to funds. They could make loans that weren't with depositor funds. And not only could they make those loans, but they could then securitize them, sell the right, obviously, to be repaid. That led to a great laxity in lending standards. Frankly, I've been saying for some time that the country made a mistake in assuming that everybody could be a homeowner. Home ownership is very important, and we try to reward it, and we try to encourage it. But in a number of cases, either because of economic reasons, or frankly sometimes because of social or other factors, there are people, large numbers of people, tens of millions in this country, who should not be in a position of home ownership at this point in their lives. And we made a mistake of pushing them into it. I think we should have been building more rental housing instead, and helping build rental housing for people like that with private-public cooperation. At any rate, we had this proliferation of bad loans. Now, the second problem is, we had the proliferation of bad loans. A number of people saw that coming, and there was some effort that some of us made to try and cut back on this proliferation of bad loans. In fact, I regret very much that Alan Greenspan, after 1994, when Congress passed a bill giving the Federal Reserve the authority to cut down on irresponsible subprime loans made outside the regular banking system, Mr. Greenspan said, no, that's too much regulation, I don't believe in it, and refused to use that authority. One of the good things that gives me some optimism about going forward is that Chairman Bernanke last year took exactly the authority that Chairman Greenspan refused to use from that 1994 statute, the Homeowners Equity Protection Act, and promulgated rules so that one of the things we will not have to worry about going forward is the renewal of these irresponsible subprime loans. Instead, we have expanded, and this was cooperative with the Bush administration, the role of the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, and a lot of the people who had gotten those subprime loans that have turned out to be problematic will be able to go to the FHA. Others won't get mortgage loans, and sadly that's necessary because these are people who shouldn't have gotten them. But the point is that while some of us saw the problem of the subprime loans, very few people, nobody I've yet been able to see, saw the extent to which modern, sophisticated financial techniques, enhanced by technology with a lot of liquidity around, were going to take those bad loans and have them rocket through the system. That is, there was a hope that the bad subprime loans would be confined to the mortgage system. And a number of people have said that. And all of us who were hoping for that were wrong. Because what we've gotten is a situation in which these very sophisticated financial devices, based on securitization, took the bad loans, packaged them, cut them, diced them, and sold them all over the world to the point where they have become a crisis situation. Now, there was some hope that diversification was going to reduce the problem of a bad set of loans. Instead, it's magnified and spread it. And so we have a two-step situation for going forward. One, we have to try to prevent the bad subprime loans from being made. As I said, I'm somewhat optimistic about that. I think that Mr. Bernanke has already taken some important steps to keep that from happening. But secondly, because these won't be the only bad loans that are made. There could be irresponsible credit card loans, auto loans. In an era of securitization, we've lost a major disciplinary factor. If I'm lending somebody else money, and I expect that person to have to repay me, I will be careful. It turns out that when I am lending someone money, and I immediately plan to sell the right to collect that money to a lot of other people, from a lot of other people, I'm not as careful. That's human nature. And the problem we have is that the various means we had thought existed to replace that lender-borrower discipline, to impose some limitations on excessive risk-taking in the era of securitization, haven't worked so well.